The Last Theorem. Introduction. On the outskirts of the Andromeda Galaxy, there exists a space station that floats in the void like a monument to the impossible. Its name is simple, the Paradox, and inside it, a white, immaculate room houses the greatest enigma intelligent species in the universe have ever faced. It is not a weapon, it is not a portal, it is an equation. An equation that has driven the brightest mathematicians of 47 different civilizations to madness. An equation that, according to legend, holds the secret to manipulating space-time itself. For 12,000 years, no one has been able to solve it. Until humanity arrived. This is the story of how a species considered primitive by the Galactic Council, a race that had barely left its solar system, achieved what the oldest minds in the cosmos could not do. This is the story of the Last Theorem. Chapter 1: The Discovery. Year 2247. Earth had just been accepted as an observer member of the Galactic Council, the body that governed more than 200 intelligent species across 14 galaxies. For humans, it was the greatest achievement in their history. For the Council, it was simply an act of courtesy toward a young species that had shown a certain potential. Humans were seen as curious, impulsive, creative even, but they were definitely not considered intellectually superior. The Zothran of Betelgeuse had natural quantum brains. The Morpheos of the Crab Nebula could process information in 12 dimensions simultaneously. The K-Tel had developed mathematics based on 47 different prime numbers. And humans, well, humans had been counting on their fingers until barely 10,000 years ago. Dr. Elena Vasquez was Earth's mathematical representative to the Council. A 52-year-old woman, professor at the University of Buenos Aires, specialist in number theory and non-Euclidean geometry. Gray hair tied into a perpetual bun, glasses that were always sliding down her nose, and a mate gourd that accompanied her everywhere to the total bewilderment of the other species. Her first day at Nexus Prime Station, the Council's headquarters, was humiliating. The K-Tel ambassador, an 8-crystalline tentacled creature named Korthax, had given her a condescending pat on the shoulder as he showed her the laboratories. "This is where real minds work, little primate," he had said, with what the universal translators interpreted as paternal affection. "Don't worry if you don't understand anything. Most species take 300 years just to comprehend even the fundamentals of what we do here." Elena had smiled politely. Inside, her Argentine ancestors were screaming a series of insults that would have made a sailor blush. But then, during the tour, it happened. They passed a sealed door, bright red, warning symbols in 47 different languages. Korthax stopped, his tentacles trembling slightly. "And that?" Elena asked. The K-Tel looked at her for a long moment, then he sighed, a sound like clinking crystals. "The Paradox," he finally said, "the greatest failure of the Galactic Council." Elena stepped closer to the door. Through a small window she could see a white room. In the center, floating in a stasis field, there was a holographic screen, and on that screen, numbers, symbols, equations that seemed to twist in on themselves. "What is it?" Elena whispered, her breath fogging the glass. 12,000 years ago, Korthax began, the ancients, the oldest civilization we know, left a legacy before disappearing. Stations like this scattered throughout the known universe, and in each one a different challenge. This one is mathematical. "An equation," Elena murmured. "Not just an equation, the ancients' last theorem. They say whoever solves it will gain the knowledge to manipulate the very fabric of space-time. Some say it's a map, others a key. No one knows for certain because no one has solved it," Elena finished. Korthax made a sound that could have been laughter or crying. "The 47 most advanced civilizations in the known universe have tried. The Zothran devoted 3,000 years. The Morpheos built supercomputers the size of entire moons. The sages of Proxima created a collective mind of 10 million individuals just to attack this problem. And nothing, failure after failure, some brilliant minds went insane trying. 200 years ago we declared the equation unsolvable and sealed the room. Now it is only a reminder, a monument to our collective arrogance." Elena didn't answer. Her eyes were fixed on the screen, studying the symbols she could see from the window. "Dr. Vasquez," Korthax called, "we must continue the tour." But Elena was already taking notes on her tablet. "Doctor, can I go in?" she asked abruptly. The K-Tel froze. "Excuse me." "The room, can I go in to see it more closely?" Korthax stared at her as if she had suggested jumping into the vacuum of space without a suit. "Dr. Vasquez, with all due respect, you are a mathematician competent, from a species that discovered calculus barely 400 years ago. This equation has defeated minds that were solving interdimensional problems when your ancestors were still living in caves." Elena finally tore her gaze from the window and looked directly at the ambassador. Then you have nothing to lose by letting me try, right?
Mm.
And there it was, that spark, that irrational stubbornness that defines humanity, that refusal to accept something is impossible just because someone else says it is. Korthax must have seen it in her eyes, because after a moment, his tentacles relaxed in what Alina would learn to recognize as resignation. 1 hour, he said finally. I'll give you 1 hour inside the room, not because I believe you'll accomplish anything, but because, well, all new members eventually ask to see it. Better we get it over with now. Alina smiled. 1 hour is all I need. The K-Tel laughed. Doctor, entire civilizations have spent centuries in that room. 1 hour is less than a blink. Then it will be a very productive blink. Chapter 2, The Room. The door opened with a pneumatic hiss that echoed like the sigh of the universe itself. Alina stepped inside, and the silence that wrapped around her was absolute. Not normal silence, but something deeper, as if this room existed slightly out of phase with the rest of reality. The walls were white, but not a normal white. It was the absence of color taken to its purest expression, the kind of white that makes your eyes desperately search for something, anything to focus on. And in the center, floating at chest height, was the holographic screen. Alina approached slowly, almost reverently. Her mate was forgotten at the entrance. The equation unfolded before her in 3 dimensions, symbols floating and rotating gently. Some she recognized, standard mathematical notation, Fourier transforms, differential operators. But others were completely alien. Symbols that seemed to change meaning depending on the angle from which you looked at them. Numbers that existed in more than one base simultaneously. Operations that seemed to violate the fundamental laws of logic. It looked beautiful, terrifying, impossible. Alina extended her hand and touched one of the symbols. The entire equation pulsed with a soft light, and suddenly her tablet vibrated. Information began to flow to her. 12,000 years of failed attempts, millions of approximations, billions of hours of computational processing. All documented, all archived, all insufficient. Okay, Alina murmured in Spanish, a habit when she was focused. Let's see what you've got. She began to walk around the equation, studying it from every angle. The Zothrin had attempted a brute force quantum approach. The Morpheos had used dimensional algorithms. The K-Tel had applied 47 different numerical systems simultaneously. All of them had assumed the equation was extremely complex and required extremely advanced tools to solve. But something bothered Alina, something in the very structure of the equation. She sat down on the floor to the scandal of the station's sensors, which had never seen anyone do that in the sacred room, and closed her eyes. She thought of her grandmother who had taught her chess when she was a child. Alina, she used to say, when a problem seems impossibly complicated, it's usually because you're looking in the wrong direction. What if? Alina's eyes snapped open. It can't be, she whispered. She sprang to her feet and began to manipulate the equation with frantic gestures. She isolated the first layer of symbols, then the second, then the third. Her heart beat like a drum. Every previous civilization had seen an incredibly complex equation and tried to solve it by adding more complexity. Bigger computers, more advanced mathematics, additional dimensions. But what if the answer was the opposite? What if the complexity was a distraction? Alina began to simplify. She took the alien symbols and translated them into their most basic form. She ignored the dimensional layers and focused on the underlying structure. She discarded everything that seemed designed to impress and kept only what was essential. And slowly, like fog dissolving at dawn, the true equation began to emerge. It was elegant, simple, almost ridiculously simple. Son of a, Alina covered her mouth. The equation, stripped of all its unnecessary complexity, was a variation of Fermat's theorem. Specifically, an extension of the Last Theorem the French mathematician had proposed in 1637 and which had not been proven until 1995. The ancients hadn't left an impossible riddle, they had left a test. A test to see who was wise enough to see beyond artificial complexity, who had the humility to simplify instead of complicate, who could see the forest despite all the trees designed to distract. With trembling hands, Alina began to write the solution, not on her tablet, not in the station system, in a paper notebook she always carried with her, with a pencil. Primitive human technology, perfect for a problem that required primitive human thinking. The solution flowed from her pencil like water from a spring, step by step, simplification by simplification, until finally. She wrote the final QED quad erat demonstrandum, what was to be proven. The equation was solved. Alina looked up at the holographic screen and, with fingers that barely trembled, entered the solution. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the entire equation flared with a golden light, so intense Alina had to shield her eyes. When the light faded, the equation was gone. In its place, floating in the air, was a single symbol. A symbol Alina recognized instantly because she had seen it in every human culture throughout history. A circle. Perfect, complete, infinite. And below it, in a language she somehow understood, a message. Welcome, children of Earth, you have passed the first test. Chapter 3, The Uproar. Korthax was reviewing interstellar trade reports when all the alarms on Nexus Prime Station began to sound simultaneously. Not emergency alarms, alarms of impossibility. The paradox room, sealed and dormant for 200 years, was transmitting a signal. A signal that hadn't been seen in 12,000 years. The resolution signal. The KTEL ambassador teleported directly to the corridor in front of the room, his 8 tentacles thrashing in controlled panic. Around him, holograms of representatives from the 47 most advanced civilizations began to materialize, all speaking at once in a polyglot chaos of shock and confusion. Impossible. The sensors must be defective. Who is in there? Evacuate the station, it could be a trap. Korthax raised 2 tentacles for silence. With the other 6, he accessed the station logs. Dr. Alina Vasquez, he announced, his voice trembling slightly, from Earth. She entered 47 minutes ago. The silence that followed was so deep you could hear the hum of fusion reactors 3 levels away. Finally, a Morpheo, its semi-corporeal form rippling with disbelief, spoke. The human, the representative of the species, admitted to the council. How long ago? 3 weeks. 2 weeks and 4 days, Korthax corrected automatically. This is ridiculous, Azothrin interjected, its quantum brain glowing with agitation inside its transparent skull. She has obviously triggered some kind of failure protocol. We must. The door opened. Alina stepped out, her gray hair messier than ever, her glasses crooked, graphite smudges on her hands. She stopped when she saw the corridor filled with the brightest minds in the known universe, all staring at her with expressions ranging from shock to indignation. Oh, she said simply, hi. Dr. Vasquez, Korthax found his voice first. What have you done? Alina blinked as if the question were strange. I solved the equation, wasn't that the point? If the previous silence had been deep, this one was abyssal. The Zothrin was the first to react, teleporting instantly toward the room. The others followed in a multi-dimensional stampede, leaving Alina and Korthax alone in the corridor. The KTEL stared at her for a long moment. How? He finally asked, his voice barely a whisper. Alina shrugged, a very human gesture. Everyone was looking for a complex answer to a complex problem. I looked for a simple answer to a simple problem. But entire civilizations, millennia of effort. They were using the wrong tools, Alina said gently. Sometimes a sophisticated hammer isn't better than a simple one if the nail is simple. From inside the room, they heard a chorus of alien voices screaming in awe, disbelief, and what could only be described as existential shock. Korthax looked at Alina with a new expression, respect, perhaps even fear. Dr. Vasquez, do you realize what this means? Alina adjusted her glasses. It means humans aren't as dumb as you thought. No, Korthax shook his tentacles. It means your species has just changed the balance of power across the galaxy. It means humanity will no longer be seen as primitive. A pause. It means the ancients were waiting specifically for you. Alina frowned. What? Before Korthax could answer, the Zothrin emerged from the room, its quantum brain pulsing with a light Alina had never seen before. It's true, the creature panted, making a sound the translators could barely process. She hasn't just solved it, she has perfected it. Her solution is more elegant than anything we attempted. It's beautiful, a Morpheo finished, its voice full of reverence. She found beauty inside the chaos. Alina felt her cheeks warm. Well, I wouldn't say that, it was just applying the principle of. The room is transmitting, someone shouted. Everyone turned to the entrance. Inside, the holographic screen had reactivated, but now it displayed something different. Coordinates. Thousands of them, locations across the galaxy and beyond. What is this? Alina asked. Korthax, accessing the station database, answered with a trembling voice. They are the locations of all the other ancient rooms, the tests they left scattered across the universe. He turned to Alina, and now there was definitely fear in his eyes. Dr. Vasquez, by solving this equation, you have unlocked the next level of the ancient legacy, and according to these data. He paused as if the words refused to come out. According to these data, only your species can access them. The ancients encoded the remaining tests so that only a human mind can even see them. The weight of those words fell over the group like a collapsing black hole. For 12,000 years, the most advanced civilizations had believed the ancient legacy was meant for them. And it turned out the ancients had been waiting for a species of partially bald primates from a blue planet in Orion's arm of an otherwise unremarkable galaxy. Alina stared at the floating coordinates and felt the weight of history, of the future, of everything humanity was about to become settle on her shoulders. I think, she said slowly, I'm going to need more mate. Chapter 4, The Revelation. The news spread through the Galactic Council like fire in pure oxygen. Within hours, every known spacefaring civilization had heard the impossible. Humans had solved the Last Theorem. Reactions were varied. The Zothrin demanded independent verification, which confirmed the solution 3 times. The Morpheos entered a collective contemplative state that lasted 4 days. The K-Tel simply fell silent, processing what it meant for their understanding of the universe. But it was the reaction of the sages of Proxima that unsettled Alina the most. They sent an ambassador directly to Earth, not to Nexus Prime where Alina was still being bombarded with questions, to Earth, to Buenos Aires specifically. To the small office at the university where Alina had worked for 30 years. The sage was a creature of pure light, more concept than matter, which materialized in Alina's office as her assistant. The young Mateo nearly fainted in shock. Dr. Vasquez, the light asked, with a voice that resonated in frequencies humans shouldn't be able to hear. She's on the space station, Mateo stammered. Can I take a message? No need, the sage replied. I came to see where she worked, to understand how a mind operating from this. The light floated around the messy office, noting the books stacked chaotically, forgotten mate cups, chalkboards filled with mathematical scribbles, posters of Argentine rock bands from the 1980s. Could achieve what more orderly minds could not. Mateo, recovering from his initial shock, felt a defensive spark of pride. Dr. Vasquez always says organized chaos is the natural environment of genius. The sage emitted something that could have been laughter. Genius, yes, that is a word, but not the correct one. Then what is? The light pulsed thoughtfully. Perspective, your doctor is not smarter than the minds that spent millennia on that problem, but she has something they lost long ago. What? The ability to see the obvious. The sage drifted to the window, looking at Buenos Aires spreading toward the horizon. When a civilization advances technologically, something strange happens. It begins to see complexity where there is none. It begins to forget that the deepest truths are often the simplest. Humans, you still remember this. You are still young enough, still humble enough to consider that the simplest answer might be the correct one. Mateo frowned. Are you saying our primitiveness is an advantage? I am saying your youth is your greatest strength, and the ancients knew it. Meanwhile, on Nexus Prime, Alina was having a similar conversation with Corthax. They had formed a kind of awkward friendship in the days after the solution. The K-Tel seemed genuinely fascinated by the human mental process, and Alina appreciated having someone to talk to who didn't treat her like a deity or a threat. They sat in the station cantina, Alina with her inevitable mate, Corthax with what she had learned was the K-Tel equivalent of coffee, a gelatinous substance that glowed faintly in the dark. Let me ask you something, Alina said, sipping her mate. Why are you being so nice to me? Most of the other species look at me like I kicked their grandmothers. Corthax waved a tentacle in what Alina had learned was the equivalent of a shrug. Because I don't have an ego to protect. The K-Tel are merchants, diplomats, not mathematicians. It doesn't hurt me to admit a human solved something I never could. He paused. But the Zothrin, the Morpheos, the sages, they built entire civilizations on their intellectual superiority. And you just demolished 12,000 years of that narrative in less than an hour. Alina smiled sadly. That wasn't my intention. I know, which makes it even more devastating. They sat in silence for a moment, watching the various alien species move through the cantina, many deliberately avoiding looking at their table. Can I ask you something? Corthax said finally. Go ahead. When you saw the equation for the first time, what did you think? Alina considered carefully. I thought it was beautiful, terrifying, and deliberately intimidating. Intimidating? Yes, designed to make you feel small, so you'd assume you needed to be bigger, smarter, more complex just to attempt it. Alina leaned forward. But here's the thing about being human, Corthax. We were experts at feeling small. We spent our entire existence looking at the universe and being absolutely terrified by how vast, ancient, and incomprehensible it is. We built our civilization on the idea that we don't understand everything and probably never will. And that's a strength. It's the strength because when you don't assume you're the smartest in the room, you actually look at the problem. You don't attack it with arrogance. You approach it with curiosity, with humility. Elena smiled. The ancients weren't looking for the most advanced civilization. They were looking for the civilization wise enough to know it doesn't know everything. Korthax was silent for a long moment, his tentacles still processing. Your species, he finally said, is going to change the universe. You know that, right? Elena looked down at her mate, seeing her distorted reflection in the liquid. I hope so, she whispered. I really hope so. Chapter 5: The First Expedition. 3 weeks after the solution, the first expedition was organized to one of the revealed locations. The coordinates pointed to a star system on the edge of the Andromeda Galaxy, a place no civilization had fully explored because, frankly, there was nothing of interest there. Just a dying sun and a few lifeless rocky planets. Or so they thought. The ship was human, the hope of humanity, a name Elena found excessively dramatic but which her team had voted for. But the crew was mixed. Humans, K-Tel, a few curious Morpheos, even a Zothrin who had swallowed enough pride to admit he wanted to see what would happen. Elena stood on the bridge, watching the stars slide past as they traveled through folded space. Beside her was Matteo, her assistant, who had insisted on coming despite never having left Earth before. Nervous, Matteo asked. Terrified, Elena admitted. You. Me too, but it's that kind of exciting terror, you know. Elena laughed. Yes, I know. The captain, a Brazilian man named Joe Silva with more scars than a space pirate, announced. Arriving at the coordinates in 3-2-1. Folded space collapsed and suddenly they were there. The system was exactly as unimpressive as expected, a dying red sun, several airless planets, asteroid fields. Sensors detect nothing unusual, the navigation officer reported. Elena frowned. The coordinates were precise. There has to be something. Korthax, who had come as a council observer, approached the window. Dr. Vasquez, what if whatever we're looking for is only visible to humans like the other tests? A light went on in Elena's mind. Computer, can you filter the scans to exclude all non-human detection technology? Processing. Load. On the main screen, something appeared where before there had been nothing. A planet, glowing with a light the alien sensors could not detect. Impossible, the Zothrin whispered. I'm looking directly there and I see nothing. But for the humans on the bridge, the planet was as clear as day, blue and green with white clouds orbiting in a space that every sensor said was empty. It's a test, Elena murmured. The ancients hid it in a frequency only human perception can detect. How is that possible? Matteo asked. I have no idea, but we're going to find out. The descent to the invisible planet was strange. The human pilots could see where they were going. The aliens aboard trusted completely in instruments that told them they were flying into empty space. This is deeply disturbing, Korthax commented, his tentacles nervously coiled. Welcome to my world, Elena replied with a grin. Landing on a planet that didn't exist for half the crew should have been impossible, but somehow the ancients had designed reality itself to bend around their creations. The landscape was beautiful, golden prairies, forests of trees that looked like crystal, mountains that touched impossibly blue skies. And in the center of it all a structure. A temple perhaps, or a laboratory. It was hard to say because the architecture defied description. It seemed to change depending on the angle you looked from, dimensions flowing like liquid. Elena led the exploration team, her station boots leaving footprints in golden grass that glowed softly with every step. Do you see this? She asked Korthax, pointing to the structure. I see nothing, the K-Tel replied, though Elena could hear frustration in his voice. Can you describe it? And there was the strangeness of the moment. Elena, a simple mathematics professor from Buenos Aires, was seeing something the most advanced civilizations in the universe could not. They entered the temple, or whatever it was, and the interior was even more impossible than the exterior. Rooms that shouldn't fit inside the available space. Corridors bending at angles that violated Euclidean geometry. And in the center, another equation. But this one was different, larger, more complex, not pure mathematics but something else, physics, philosophy, art, all intertwined into a unified expression of something. It's beautiful, Matteo whispered. Elena stepped closer, studying it. The symbols floated and danced, and as she looked at them, she began to understand. It wasn't an equation to solve. It was an equation to experience, to feel. The ancients hadn't left only mathematical riddles. They had left lessons, teachings about the nature of reality, consciousness, existence itself. And only a species young enough, curious enough, humble enough could receive those lessons. Alina extended her hand and touched the equation. And the universe opened. Chapter 6, The Truth. What Alina experienced in that moment is hard to put into words, because it wasn't just information, it was understanding. She saw the universe as the ancients had seen it, not as a set of objects and forces, but as a symphony of interwoven patterns, every particle connected to every other, every thought resonating through dimensions, every choice creating infinite branches of reality. She saw the history of the ancients, a civilization that had reached unimaginable technological heights, that had conquered death, transcended matter, manipulated time itself. And in their perfection, they had discovered something terrible. They had reached an evolutionary dead end. When a civilization becomes too advanced, too perfect, it stops growing, it stops changing. It stagnates in a state of immutable perfection, which is, essentially, another form of death. The ancients understood this too late. They had optimized everything that could be optimized, solved every problem that could be solved, and in that state of complete perfection, they realized they no longer had purpose. So they made a radical decision. They dissolved. They didn't die, they simply disintegrated back into the fabric of the universe itself. They became pure potential, waiting to be rediscovered by a civilization young enough, imperfect enough, hungry enough to do something with the knowledge they could no longer use. And they had left these tests scattered across the cosmos, not as riddles to solve, but as filters to find a specific species. A species that still remembered how to stumble, how to fail, how to be amazed by the simple. A species like humanity. Alina came back to herself gasping. Matteo caught her as she swayed. "Doctor, what happened? You've been standing there for 3 hours." 3 hours, Alina blinked. It had felt like only a moment. She looked around. The whole team was there, watching her with concern. Even the aliens who couldn't see the structure seemed uneasy. "The ancients," Alina said, her voice hoarse. "I understand them now. I understand why they disappeared, why they left this for us." "Why?" Korthax asked softly. Alina turned to the K-tel, tears running down her cheeks. Because they were alone, perfectly, absolutely alone. They had advanced so far beyond any other species that they had no one to share what they found, and wisdom with no one to share it with is just emptiness. She paused, wiping her tears. So they unmade themselves, they became pure knowledge, waiting for someone to come and claim it. They weren't looking for heirs, they were looking for friends, companions, a species advanced enough to understand their work, but human enough to still appreciate the wonder of it. The silence that followed was profound. Finally, Matteo spoke. "What do we do now?" Alina looked at the equation still floating in the air. "We learn, we grow, but we never forget where we came from. We never forget what it is to stumble, fail, doubt." She turned to the group. "The ancients died of perfection, we have the chance to live in imperfection, and that is the real gift." Epilogue 50 years later. 50 years later, Alina Vasquez died peacefully in her sleep in her home in Buenos Aires, with a mate gourd on her nightstand and a notebook full of unfinished equations beside her bed. She was 102 years old. She had solved 47 of the 200 known ancient tests. She had trained 3 generations of human and alien mathematicians. She had written 15 books that became required reading in 89 different civilizations. But her greatest achievement was not any equation she solved or discovery she made. It was this: she changed the way the universe thought about knowledge. Before Alina, civilizations measured their value by what they knew. After Alina, they began to measure it by what they could still learn. Her funeral was broadcast across 14 galaxies. Representatives of 200 species came to pay their respects. The Galactic Council declared a day of silence in her honor. But perhaps the most moving tribute came from the K-tel. Korthax, now elderly himself, standing beside the grave of his friend, spoke with a voice trembling with emotion. "Alina Vasquez taught us that wisdom is not knowing all the answers. It is remembering to ask the right questions. She taught us that perfection is a trap, that growth requires the willingness to be imperfect. She taught us that the best solutions are often the simplest." He paused, his tentacles trembling. "But above all, she taught us to be humble, and because of that, the universe is a better place." Alina's grave in Buenos Aires became a place of pilgrimage. Not for humans, curiously, but for alien species who came to leave offerings, unsolved equations, problems they couldn't understand, hoping that perhaps somehow the spirit of the woman who had taught them to think differently might guide them. And on Nexus Prime, the Paradox Room was renamed. It is now called the Vasquez Room. And carved above the entrance in 89 different languages is a phrase Alina used to say. Sometimes the most complicated answer isn't the best. Sometimes you just need to look with simpler eyes. Somewhere in the universe, in one of the 153 ancient tests still unsolved, a young 23-year-old human mathematician named Aisha Chen stands before an equation that has defeated the best minds of 12 civilizations. She carries a cup of tea, her hair is messy, her glasses are crooked. And as she looks at the equation, she smiles. Because she too sees what everyone else does not see. The beauty and simplicity. The wisdom and humility. The answer that was there all along. She takes out her notebook, takes out her pencil, and begins to write. Humanity still has much to learn, but they have proven they are willing to do so. And that, in the end, is all the ancients ever hoped for. All anyone can hope for. The willingness to keep growing. The humility to keep asking. The courage to keep being wonderfully, brilliantly, imperfectly human. The end.